returning to a topic we've covered a couple of times, which is batteries, and in this case, long-term storage batteries, and just looking at the options of what's available and what we can do as we go forward. Obviously trying to transition over to renewables and how batteries are actually going to have to play a part in the overall solution in terms of being able to deliver consistent electricity for anyone, for all of us around the world, because renewables obviously sort of come and go in terms of their supply, and we have to have sort of storage backup requirements that can kick in. The issue obviously being is that current lithium-ion batteries, as good as they are, have a host of issues associated with them. We can talk about the fact that what they're made of is ultimately probably not sustainable in the long term if it was to really kick into gear, that we produce a lot of them. But then there's also the fact that they don't last as long as what we need them to, and a whole range of other things. So obviously looking at different technologies and different elements that can be used to construct a battery. This DW clip that I watched about the idea of salt or sand being used as an element in constructing a battery was fascinating. They also obviously showed off a lot of other different types of options that could be used. And I can't recall the name of it, but I remember they mentioned one that was completely renewable, reusable, which sounded like a pretty good thing. And it's interesting that I'm sure they'll crack this at some point, because it's a necessity that we're going to need to get to it, and it's fascinating. Like, I'm going to enjoy that world when we get to it, because it's going to be that's going to be transformative when that becomes like a wide scale, big scale operation. But the other thing that kind of occurred to me through looking at this is it's interesting that, a bit like fossil fuels. Batteries great. They when they were sort of first implemented and discovered to be used in the manner in which they're being used, it sort of transformed the world. But it was a finite resource with environmental impacts. And it's interesting that in both of those situations, we're now having to go to exploring options that are going to be ultimately sustainable and better for the environment. And it's interesting the trajectory that's gone in over a couple of hundred years, effectively, if you count fossil fuel use as well.
Yeah, well, look, I think what you've seen here is, lithium maybe turning into, say, something like the DVD. It, you know, Lithium batteries are fantastic for small devices like phones or laptops, but above that, they're not really optimal. The technologies that they've developed for batteries have made it possible to use them for backup power for housing and for powering electric vehicles. But it's not an optimum format, energy storage format, really, for those things, for all the reasons that we've sort of spoken about. And the technology now is relatively old, so they've been improving it, and they've changed the membranes, they've changed catalysts, and but it's at its limit. And there are other options, and the technologies now that we're now seeing developed are going to take us into another sort of era of batteries. Some will still have lithium, but others will have other materials. They'll have salts and sand and whatever else you can imagine, um, as catalysis, as they start to use artificial intelligence to design membranes and catalysts that will work within a battery or energy storage environment. And they use different types of battery, not just necessarily chemical, but it could be heat storage batteries as well. Um, I think we'll see a very different landscape over the next 10 years. And of course, you've pointed out the sustainability question. It was great, at first for lithium, but now when you consider that we've just decided everything has to have lithium storage, it's just not sustainable. And we still don't really have the right recycling tools either for lithium batteries. So, yeah, something will have to give. A new technology will rise, and let's hope it's a good one.
Yeah, and just finally on that, I'm always fascinated by the physics behind a lot of this stuff, and the way it's sort of determined how it works. Like like you're saying, like the heat, using moving energy into different forms in order to make it storable or reusable or whatever. It's really quite fascinating. like just on the pure science of it, how it works. It almost seems like I won't call it magic or whatever because that's a bit of an odd term to use for something that's scientifically driven. But um, it's just interesting that these discoveries have been quite sort of groundbreaking in that way, just using the tools that we have discovered over so long.
Well, that's right, and as I say, the technology that's available now to design new types of batteries wasn't really even available 5 years ago at the scale it is today. You know, artificial intelligence, models, all sorts of things that can simulate environments and allow them to do the science much more quickly to build working prototypes. So that's where it's headed. It's very exciting, and I think that you know for all the people that are very concerned about, I guess, climate net zero, I think actually that we're only now, in the last decade, we've actually developed the tools that will allow us to transition away. And they will probably still take another 10 years to get mature, but I think you'll see at that point the transition will occur very, very quickly.